The Adventurers Guild often names a location a dungeon for a very good reason. While traditional dungeons are often underground prisons for any kind of culture, these dungeons ultimately do the same thing, as anyone who enters these locations unprepared might as well be trapped like a prisoner until they meet their untimely demise. And few locations in the dry climes of Thanalan fit that bill better than the ruins of Belladia. Welcome, my friends. I am the Synodic Scribe, and together let us delve into the dungeon that is the Sunken Temple of Qarn. The Sunken Temple of Qarn is a location with a rich yet odd history. But to fully understand why, we need to start at the temple's sudden re-emergence. The Seventh Umbral Calamity, or rather Bahamut's Rampage, created no end of elemental activity and ethereal disturbances. Massive corrupted crystals litter the land to this day, and the once varied seasons of Kurthus have yet to recover from the flash freeze brought on by the Calamity. The deserts of Thanalan were no different. The chaos of Bahamut's arrival had caused earthquakes and fissures to open up locations that were once sealed away by nature and time. One of the most notable locations being none other than the Temple of Qarn. At first, people were just as confused as they were intrigued by the sudden appearance of the ruins. With the location being so close to the settlement of Little Alamigo, it didn't take long for the reports to start flooding in back to Ul'dah. Almost immediately, the Immortal Flames were dispatched to secure the location for research purposes. This was mostly done for two reasons. One, to ensure the location was safe and presented no immediate threat to either Little Alamigo or the lands of Ul'dah. And two, that the elite of Ul'dah knew that the emergence of a new ruin such as this would be a siren song to looters and grave robbers. A valuable relic such as this couldn't be suffered to fall into the hands of petty thieves, and so it was secured by the Immortal Flames. At first, the researchers that were initially sent to the temple were excited to see what they'd learn, but realized that something was very wrong. The Sunken Temple of Qarn was not left defenseless, not at all. Not only did all sorts of monsters and beasts turn the temple into their new home, but the temple itself was filled to the brim with all sorts of physical and magical traps designed to contain, torture, and kill anyone who didn't belong there. Eventually, members of the Adventurers Guild were hired on to act as bodyguards to the research teams. They'd also be paid to try and disarm any traps that have yet to be set off. This turned out to be the right call, as progress deeper into the temple was steadily being made, but said progress was coming at a snail's pace, as everyone was attempting to be cautious. This caution was well earned, as some adventurers had ventured into the deeper caverns of the temple, never to be seen again. But not all was lost, as many discoveries were made. It came to light that the Sunken Temple of Qarn was originally used by the civilization of Belladia to worship one of the 12 gods, Azima the Warden, also known as the Goddess of the Sun. But this wasn't just any site of worship. Research suggests that these ruins were almost exclusively used by the royalty of Belladia. There's evidence of Lalafuto I, III, IV, as well as other lines having dedicated some resources during their rule to construct entire new sections of the temple, always adding to Qarn's brilliance and making their legacy more impressive. As a place of worship that was decorated with the wealth of royalty, it made complete sense as to why the temple was so heavily fortified with dangerous traps and vicious spells. But as the researchers dug deeper, something revolutionary caught their eyes. Belladia was not the first civilization to use these grounds. It suggested that this was originally a temple discovered by Belladia in its youth, and that the Temple of Qarn was built on top of it. Research as to what that civilization was originally is still ongoing, but assumptions have led intellectuals to believe this may be one of the many Eorzean countries that existed during the 5th Astral Era, but was ultimately lost during the War of the Magi. However, this was simply a preliminary theory. Much more work would need to be done to convert anything into fact, and research into the temple had practically slowed to a halt at this point. But eventually, progress would finally pick back up as a specialized group of adventurers would eventually take the lead on clearing out the temple. Not only did they slay scores of monsters, but they also dismantled many puzzles and traps that would have proven troublesome for the researchers later down the line. One such puzzle had to do with the scales of Belladia. Anyone who's well versed in Belladian history knows that their culture valued two things above all: power and wisdom. These two things were represented by the flames of magic and the fruits of knowledge. Only with the flame balanced on one side and the fruits balanced on the other would anyone pass into the deepest halls of the temple unharmed. And it was here that the adventurers would reach their final trial. These talented adventurers would eventually finish clearing out the ruins and were praised for their efforts. Now research into the temple could begin more earnestly, as the teams would delve even deeper than before. But even though the adventurers were swift and thorough, the Sunken Temple of Qarn wasn't out of tricks just yet. Sometime after the first clearing of the temple, Ul'dah's Order of Nald'thal, as well as the Amajna and Sons mineral concern, would work together to create a team dedicated to securing the most precious artifacts of the ruins. The expedition would be led by none other than Naneko Neko, a highly respected Lalafellan researcher known for her publications on the civilization of Sil'Di. With her eye for detail and a gentle approach to excavation, she was a perfect fit to lead this team. But eventually things would go wrong. During her investigation of the temple, Naneko would become bold and venture into the deepest reaches of the ruins on her own. Thanks to her expertise, she avoided the traps easily, but most of her team wouldn't leave the temple alive. Unknown to Naneko or her researchers, a group of tomb raiders had moved in behind them and tried to loot whatever valuables weren't already claimed by Ul'dah. These fools didn't have the foresight or talent to notice the traps when they saw them, and unknowingly set off many of the worst ones as they attempted to muscle in on what the researchers had found. This caused many temple guardians to reactivate, and all of this commotion agitated the local monster population enough that they invaded the ruins once more. Between the vicious beasts and hostile traps, many of the researchers in Naneko's team would lose their lives. Word of this would eventually reach the ears of the same adventurers who cleared out the Temple of Qarn before. After a debriefing by Naneko's brothers, Popokuli and Sesaruka, the team of seasoned adventurers would return to the Sunken Temple to try and save Naneko as well as any surviving members of her team. The adventurers would find that the temple had indeed gotten worse. Much worse, as some of Qarn's most dangerous failsafes had been reawakened. Whomever created these traps and wove these spells clearly did so with longevity in mind, as the adventuring party would realize their first time through was only removing these surface-level threats. But our adventurers would not be deterred. The monsters would be cold once more, and even the most advanced magical defense systems within the temple would be put down. This demanded much more effort from the adventurers than last time, but they succeeded in carving a path to the deepest parts of the temple once more, eventually finding the lead researcher, Naneko. Apparently, the Lalafell was so absorbed in her discoveries and research that she failed to notice that the tomb raiders had set off so many traps within the temple, and was completely oblivious that her team was being slaughtered one by one. But before she could mourn their loss, Naneko made sure a rescue operation was mounted to retrieve any survivors. Turns out, there were a handful of researchers that had hid themselves well enough to be rescued in time and were successfully brought back to Ul'dah. Given how horrible an event this was and how tragic the loss of life had become, Naneko worked with the Order of Nald'thal to spread rumors that would eventually keep any more looters and tomb raiders away from the Sunken Temple of Qarn, hopefully to prevent something like this from happening ever again. But, same as before, the adventurers were thanked for their timely intervention, and the Sunken Temple of Qarn was once more brought to a semi-safe state. Thus is the tale of the Sunken Temple. This is a story of great discovery as much as it is one of tragic warnings. It's completely natural to become excited by the prospects of the new, the undiscovered, and undisturbed. However, if you're not careful and disregard the lives of those around you in pursuit of those things, you will eventually find your hands stained with blood. And mayhaps that blood will be your own, as you join the remains of a long-dead civilization. So take this story to heart and ponder on the many discoveries of Qarn until next we meet. Till then, stay safe, my friends. Thank you all for watching to the end. If you enjoyed this video, why not subscribe and share this with your fellow adventurers? With your help, I'll try to reach out even further and bring even greater stories to you. Although, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge my biggest contributors. A grand thank you to Rovakis, Potato, Burn My Pancakes, The Yellow Couch, Papaya Cyan, Sage Mouse, Volvalis Oma, Cizane, Azeri, and Cat, with an additional nod to the scholarships on screen. Links to things like my Twitter and that of my channel artist Caddy can be found in the description. Thank you all for your viewership as well as your support, and I hope all of you have a wonderful day. Class dismissed.